Yo, what's going on? Welcome. I hope everything's going well with you. I'm really excited for today's video. I've been making a lot of beats lately, and I don't know if it's just the samples I've been coming across or just my influences right now. There's been a common trend in my beats in that they've been way slower than I'm typically used to. I'm usually making beats between like 85 to low 90s in terms of BPM, but lately my sample beats have been a lot slower, and it's just been a really good vibe. And I'm hoping I can show that just because a beat is slower doesn't mean it's necessarily less groovy, something you can't nod your head to and really vibe with. First things first, the sample that we're going to be using today is off this record right here, George Benson. If I haven't done a video with the George Benson sample yet, there's definitely a lot more to come. I use George Benson samples all the time. I'm a huge fan of his, and this record is no exception. The Love Times Love record is one of my favorite records of all time. I love it so much, and maybe we can sample that another time. This is Weekend in LA. It's a live record, but even though it's live, there's still a ton of samples on here. So let's get this recorded onto the MPC, chop it up, and we can get right into this. Let's get it. So I've got the sample loaded up and chopped up. Let's take a quick listen to it, and I want you to notice how slow this sample is. I haven't changed the speed of it or anything. This is just how it originally sounded. So I'm just going to tap tempo this, and we'll see what the BPM would be if I just went with this original sample speed. So at this speed, it's looking like it'd be around 46 BPM, which is obviously super slow. That's about half of what I would usually do. So one thing you can do with a sample this speed is kind of play it at this 46 BPM speed and then double time the drums. Everything will line up and it gives a cool kind of sound. And maybe I'll do another video like that at some point because I do really like that style. But lately what I've been doing is really just keeping the beat super slow. So I don't want to be at 46 BPM. We'll speed it up a little bit, but I'm not going to speed it up to the 80 BPM. I'll do something a little bit lower. Let's see what we can get. I'm really liking that speed. Let's check the BPM on that and we'll see where we're at right now. The way I'm doing that, by the way, is just as I'm hitting the pads, I'm also hitting the tap tempo button, and then the BPM will show up at what the sample is currently at. So it's sitting right around 60, and I think that's going to be a really great spot for us. So now that I have that BPM set up, let's record the sample chop. One of the benefits of doing slow beats too is even if you do a 2-bar loop, it's not going to sound super repetitive because it's still going to be a decent length. If you did a 2-bar loop at 90 BPM, I can't do the math, but it's going to be a heck of a lot shorter than doing a 2-bar loop at 60. So just to show how that plays out, I am going to do 2 bars, and you'll see that it really doesn't sound that repetitive. Let's get it. This is going to be gross. This is going to be gross, I can already tell. So we've already got our 60 BPM sample loop, and you can already kind of tell if you compare this to something that's a little bit faster, it just gives you a really different feeling. Like for me, it's just, you really get to hear the details in the sample, and it really just gets my head nodding. So now let's get into recording some drums on this. I already have a bunch of different drum samples loaded up onto track 2. First thing I want to start with is hi-hat. One thing with all the slow beats that I've been doing lately when it comes to the hi-hat is 80% of the time, I'm doing 16th note patterns rather than the typical 8th. So just to show what I mean by that, here's what the sample is. And if I was doing an 8th note pattern, it would be something like this. That's a very standard pattern for beats, and I find works a lot of the time, but because this sample is so slowed down, I like to double that up and play twice as many hi-hats, making them 16th notes rather than 8th. So I'll put the hi-hat sound onto 16 levels of velocity. That way we can just add a little bit more interest to it. But if we want to keep that soulful but slightly modern sound, almost like that knowledge style, we'll still keep the quantization on just to make sure that it's really knocking hard. When it comes to the velocity that I'm playing in for these 16th notes, I'm going to try to keep it slightly random rather than doing a loop pattern. While I'm playing it, I'll try to just play what feels good. That way we'll just have a little bit of sort of human randomness to it. So let's record it, see how it sounds. That timing was terrible, but thank you to the quantization for cleaning it up for me. And you can tell just by listening to this loop that we have so far, there's so much space to have a really hard pounding kick, which is another thing I like about having this low speed. It gives us a ton of space between the snares if we're doing the classic 2 and 4 beat snares. So I'll put the snare down next, and then we can really get that kick bumping, and I'll show you what I mean. And what I mentioned with the hi-hat is we can get a slightly more modern sound, which I don't mind leaning towards as much when we have such a strong sample. Like, I'm getting a lot of really strong, soulful vibes from it. Typically, I go with the really classic sounding sample break drums, but here I'm going to lean into the slightly more modern with maybe doing a bit of a clap sound for the snare or something in that regard. So let's record down that snare sound, and then we can move into the kick. Let's get it. So after thinking about it for a bit, I think I'm actually going to use 2 snare sounds. I have this rim and this clap. Again, the clap sound is super modern, but with this beat I really don't mind. So let's record that down, and then we'll keep it moving. Let's get it. So let's get into this kick. As I mentioned, we have a lot of space here. I think we can really add something intricate and really kind of lay into the kick. So let's put a pattern down and see how it sounds. I'm liking how that sounds a lot. I'm really into this pattern, and I think the drums are matching the sample perfectly with this slow style. But I want to add a little bit of extra spice to this kick pattern. It's going to be super subtle, but I think it's going to add a lot to it. So I'm going to put the kick onto 16 level of velocity really quick. And just to add that extra small piece of intricacy, I just want to put one little extra kick sound in there at this lower velocity, just to give it a little bit of a pickup. So let's add that in. Also, because I'm going to want this pickup kick to be slightly off time, and that way it'll just add even more nuance to it, I'm going to change our time correction from 16th notes to 16th notes triplet, and now let's add in that one extra note. You can see I added that in right at the end of the 4th bar. It's really subtle, but I think that's going to add something really nice. When I'm keeping elements in my beats quantized, which I don't do often, but when I do, I find 1 or 2 little things, you can move that off the grid, and it will really add a little bit of shuffle and movement to your beat that otherwise can sometimes sound a little bit stagnant. So keep that in mind when you're doing quantized beats as well. So I'll copy over these sequences, that way we can use the drum pattern to add different chops onto. The sample itself was, I think, 4 pages long, so we'll definitely be able to find something, maybe even 2 more. That way we just have some more movement to this. I'm loving this beat. I think there's a lot of elements that we could add, but this is a really great bass idea. I'm loving the bass that's in this actual sample, so if I were to finish this beat, I don't think I would actually add an additional bass line on top of it. I would just use EQing to utilize the bass sounds that are in here. So I found this sound that I think we can add to the beat. I'm going to put this on 16 levels tune. I've already tuned the bass note to match our sample, so everything else in here should be pretty close to something that matches. Let's see if we can come up with a pattern, and let's see how it sounds. And I ended up mixing that pretty far back into the beat. I definitely wouldn't want it to be at the forefront, but all those little textures definitely make a big difference on these slow beats as well. But I hope this video showed some of the really strong benefits that you can get from making these slower beats. Rather than making something around 90, which is pretty traditional to sample-based beats, if you find a sample that is really slow and you find it's not translating to a fast beat, sometimes you just have to let the sample lead a little bit, and it can lead to some really great pieces. Like I said, I feel like I've been making a lot of really slow beats lately just because of the things I've been listening to sample-wise and the things that have been inspiring me. But if you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for hanging out. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Peace.